Hello all, my name is Stephanie Valencia. I am a PhD student at CMU in the HCII, and I work in accessibility research. And today I will be facilitating this conversation with a very special guest we have today, Dr. Michele Williams. And before we get started and I introduce you, I just wanted to pass it on to Cole, who will explain how the captioning system we have on today will work.
Yeah, if you are interested in reading a live transcript of today's conversation, if you go up to the top left of Zoom where it says Live and Otter AI Live Notes, you can click the drop-down arrow, and that drop-down menu, View Stream on the Otter AI Live Notes, will open up a separate web browser that will contain a ongoing transcript. And I will paste that link in chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So today we have a very special speaker with us, Dr. Michele Williams. Dr. Michele Williams has 15 years of academic and industrial experience in UX, accessibility, and technology. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science, Master's of Software Engineering with a focus on human-computer interaction, and Ph.D. in Human-Centered Computing with a focus on user-centered research with participants with disabilities to build accessible tech. In industry, her positions have included Senior Voice User Interface Designer at Convergys, Accessibility Analyst at Level Access, and Senior UX Researcher focused on accessibility at Pearson. Most recently, she has moved into independent consulting, starting her company M.A.W. Consulting LLC, or Making Accessibility Work. She is passionate about ensuring people with disabilities are not excluded from technology and has a goal of influencing the UX field to be the pioneers of this inclusion. Oh yes, please.
Hi everyone, thank you.
So welcome, Michele. We also wanted to add that during grad school, you were publishing important accessibility research on the ways blind and sighted people navigate together. Mm-hmm. And we had the opportunity to have you this summer to share on your paper, Just Let the Cane Hit It, which was a really interesting talk. And so we're super excited to have you back with us today.
Thank you so much. This is actually my third time this year because Professor Patrick Carrington had me talking to one of his classes earlier this year as well. So you guys are becoming a fan favorite.
That's awesome. That's, I think, a positive thing about this new virtual world, be able to have you join us repeatedly. So great. So today we will have kind of like a panel style conversation in which we have a couple of questions to ask you. And then at the end, we'll have like an open Q&A session in which feel free, all of the participants joining us today, to raise your hand and participate actively. So you can start taking notes or think about all the questions you might have at the end. But to begin with, I just wanted to ask if you could please share a little bit about your background and maybe your education, industry experience, and like what led you to where you are today.
Wonderful. So I've been around a minute, so it's going to take a little while. Sit back. One funny tidbit as I was thinking about, like, how do I tell my background? The first thing is that up until maybe middle school or so, I would have told you I was going to be a fashion designer. So that was my initial aspiration. And I had all the little kits and I would draw. And then we got cable where we had Bravo. Again, I'm old, so it was like still kind of a new thing, and they were showing a lot of fashion shows, and I was like, oh, that's what a real fashion show looks like. Oh, never mind. So I let that go because my drawings didn't look like their drawings. So I knew I needed to maybe let that slide. So eventually I was like, okay, my mom is telling me I have to go to college, right? That's not even an option. So I got to pick something. And I was gravitating more towards math and logic and all of that. So to show my age, I graduated high school in 1999. And that was kind of the height of all the dot-coms and tech and all of that. So there was this field called computer science. Didn't exactly know what that meant, but it sounded right. You know, if you like math, you're supposed to do computer science. That's what I was hearing. So I decided to give that a try. So that's where the bachelor's started. During that time, I'm from Maryland. I went to HBCU, Bowie State in Maryland, and I was actually part of a undergraduate research program by the National Science Foundation that was encouraging particularly minority students to do undergraduate research and then go on to pursue graduate degrees. I still wasn't intending to do that up until it was almost time to graduate. And being from Maryland, most people in that area, particularly in tech, either work for the government or a government contractor. And either way, neither one of those seemed to be appealing to me at that time. So I decided, okay, let me try this grad school stuff. Maybe I'll spend a couple more years in school. Maybe I can, jump into a different kind of career. Again, I'm telling you all of this very honestly to let you know that these decisions were not some deep thought out, philosophical kind of decisions. They were just what made sense at the time, what opportunities were available at the time. And, I just kind of went for these things. I had the grades and everything, to do grad school. So why not try that? Fortunately, I ended up at Auburn University under Dr. Juan Gilbert, who has since moved to different universities, but he had an HCI lab. And he was also able to secure me funding in something called a Bridge to the Doctorate program, which was another NSF funded program. I still was thinking computer science though, so I went there specifically to get a master's of software engineering. And that's what I was doing, but then I learned about HCI, and that probably is kind of a testimony of a lot of people that they still don't quite know that HCI is a thing they can study until they happen upon it. So I kind of minored, I guess, in HCI, and was getting towards the end of my master's, was being encouraged to stay to get the doctorate, and I had the funding and everything, but I had what I did not know at the time was imposter syndrome. At the time, I didn't have the word for it. I don't think it had yet even really been discovered as a syndrome because I didn't learn about it until maybe a year or so after I left. But I just knew that I felt like I was getting good at school. I've been in school since I was like 3 years old. I felt like I was just good at getting good grades or fooling everyone around me, and I needed to leave before they found out. And I knew I had that feeling. I didn't tell anyone else. And so I literally left school because of that. And now I realize it was because of imposter syndrome. So I give that testimony to, tell others if you're having that kind of feeling, please look into that and don't let that dictate. I don't regret leaving, but it certainly changed, some things about my life, whether I had left versus stayed. Nonetheless, I made the decision to go, and I thought I would get a programming job because I had learned about accessibility in my master's because our professor, Dr. Gilbert, kind of asked us one day, how would a person with a disability use this thing you're making? But we didn't learn accessibility. The answer was, I don't know. And I still didn't know. And it was intriguing to me to know, but I didn't know how to get into accessibility. So I went with what I knew. I was either going to go be a programmer, or eventually what I ended up doing was becoming a voice user interface designer. And that happened because I had a classmate a year ahead of me who was working in Northern Virginia as a voice designer. That was her dream job, designing voice interfaces. Particularly at that time, we were doing them for telephone systems, 800 numbers. But we know now we have things like Alexa and all that. So that was her dream thing, to do that. I was skilled in it. It wasn't my dream, but I was uniquely qualified, and it got me back to Maryland. So I went ahead and did that, and I figured that would be my life. Let's just do this as a career. And I was there for 5 years. Turns out the economy started to shift. I forget what year this was, sometime maybe around 2010 or so. And the job wasn't as fun. We were starting to have layoffs, and we were not doing the creative stuff. We were just doing maintenance. And I just really got super frustrated, like, okay, this is not it. And I don't want this to be it for forever. I really want to learn about this accessibility stuff. That just struck me. Lo and behold, I ended up finding a job as an accessibility analyst at a company that's now known as Level Access. At the time, it was SSB BART Group. And they were willing to train you to test software, hardware, websites against these standards, Section 508 and WCAG. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, please hire me. So they did. And I worked there for about a year. And I just really loved learning how to test with assistive technology, with manual methods, working alongside people with disabilities, getting to know the community, getting to understand why I was making crack code, getting frustrated that I didn't learn this in all my 6 years of school and all these degrees. And I realized, okay, I want to know so much more about this that I want to go back to school. And so at that time, I had a house, adult life was kicking in, so I couldn't move. But I called Dr. Gilbert. He said there's 2 schools in Maryland, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and Towson, who have professors that know about accessibility. So I ended up at UMBC and ended up with an advisor that was focused on accessibility, Amy Hurst, and also worked with Sean Kane. He was my other co-advisor. And at the time, our conference department chair was Andrew Sears, whose name you might know as well. So awesome group of accessibility people, and eventually realized I couldn't work and do the doctorate, not a traditional doctorate. So I went back full time. So that's my experience of, at that point, I had been working about 7 years, and I stopped and went back to school. Now I had to get rid of my house. I was getting rid of my house anyway. It was that bad thing. I shouldn't have bought it. But the timing worked out where I was like, Mom, can I move back home? I know I'm old, but let's, can we do this one more time? And she was gracious enough to let me move back in. And so I was able to go back to school full time and get that degree. And so that's where I met some of you guys as professors now and postdocs and all of that. We were all colleagues. Coming up together in the PhD program. And I was very intentional about studying accessibility and doing accessibility research, and also staying in the lane of HCI. So I have an HCC degree and did all of it around user-centered research. So fast track, after that, we're going to get into more about why I went back to industry after that. But post that, I did do 2 internships while I was getting my degree, one at Yahoo and one at Microsoft Research. And then after graduating, I worked at Intel for about 7 months, mostly in their wearables division, but then they disbanded that division, did a very short stint in Internet of Things. But again, I realized I should have tried for more accessibility-based jobs, and ended up finding a senior UX researcher focused on accessibility job at Pearson that I did for about the last almost 3 years before going independent. So that's a whole lot about me, but hopefully it helps.
No, thank you for sharing. That's really wonderful, because you gave us a great detailed glimpse, and like showing us that sometimes the path is not really linear like we think. Sometimes we're like, oh, I'll just do this and I'll get this, but you learn yes, you learn around in the way. And so I wanna maybe I do wanna go into like trying to understand how, like, after taking a break from industry and going to a PhD program, you considered like, did you consider ever like staying in like that academia world, or how did you ultimately end up again in industry, and how did you use that experience from the PhD, that's that research skill, that we develop into your industry experience after?
Great question. Because obviously, when you get a doctorate, that's a different level of job, right, than any other degree. So naturally, just part of the natural progression is to maybe consider staying and becoming a professor, or going maybe into something more like a research lab. Even though they're very competitive to get into, it's still something you think about. But for me, it was 2 things. One, just the professoriate just didn't draw me, right? It just didn't feel like me. I know it's very valuable, and I know people who are very good at it, but I'm very observant. So I was very mindful to watch my advisors and professors while I was in school, and watch their life, their lifestyle, what they really needed to do versus what we think professors do. So this is some of the advice I have to you as well. When you get opportunity to sit in places, even while you're in school, pay attention to what life is really, really like, and see if you want that to be your life. That didn't just, to me, resonate as my life. Also, I still was very frustrated that, all along the way, all these years, we're still making inaccessible software, and it's in an inaccessible web and everything else, everything. So what is going to disrupt that? Now, as a professor, yes, I could teach my students accessibility and then they can go off and go and infiltrate industry. And that's definitely one way to influence that. But for me, I felt like I had a lot of experience. I had worked in industry, I had done accessibility auditing, and now I had done user-centered research. I felt like I might have a bigger impact if I infiltrated some of these larger companies like a Pearson, like an Intel, whomever, or even now as an independent consultant, having even shorter stints at more companies to influence what's happening today. I didn't want to feel like I was only going to possibly influence something in the future. I needed people to wake up now. And I felt like I was a loudmouth enough. I'm a force enough. And honestly, having credentials like a PhD going back into industries where traditionally PhDs aren't present gives me even more of a opportunity to override what may have been a decision that could have, slipped through without someone like me coming in and waving different things around. So, when I saw my classmates who had disabilities, who could do life altering, life changing research, but then get stuck trying to submit their paper to the website because the website was inaccessible, we have a problem. And I'm not okay just sitting back and pretending that that's not a problem. And even if we look at, honestly, some people who do accessibility research, they don't even know how to create accessible PowerPoints or give an accessible presentation because they're so blinders on with the research that they do, they don't understand the breadth of it. So by me understanding both a depth and breadth, I felt like I want to try my hand at shifting some things where I can. So that's where the decision primarily came from. Yeah.
Yeah, I I think there's so many like little pieces of important highlights that you just mentioned. Like sometimes there is definitely a challenge in transferring what we know in academia to real world products, and it is actually that experience that's needed in academia, but also in the real like practice world to inspire and guide this process. And in this, I guess throughout all your years of experience, you spend a lot of time working with communities of people with disabilities. And so I was wondering if you have any advice that you could share with researchers to better engage with people with disabilities.
For that, I think we kind of have a problem in UX in general, where I think what we're supposed to be is in service to others. But instead, I think it's become a field where people think what they say should go, period. They're the expert or they're the one that knows all. And so they're not creating anymore on behalf of. It's almost like I'm doing this for you, and almost like you should be grateful, that I graced you with this my design or whatever it is. And unfortunately, I think that seeps into when you're working with someone with a disability, particularly combining that with ableism, and the idea that this person that you are engaging with is not your peer, is not your equal, that somehow they're helpless and hapless and can't do for themselves unless you intervene, unless you come in and save the day, unless you come in and build this thing for them. And so it is imperative to flip that mindset and recognize that you are just a conduit to a solution on behalf of whatever population you are representing, and get that very clear in your mind before you even start to engage with your participants, so you don't bring any of those biases with you in your engagement. So, yeah.
Yeah. Regarding ableism, like that, it's such an important term, and I wonder if you can like explain a little bit to us. I don't know if everybody is familiar with it, but
Yes, and I'm just now learning to, for me, I felt like, oh shoot, I didn't learn enough about disability justice and words like that until later on as well. And I'm still learning about it, but essentially, and I have to say essentially because it's very much a nuanced thing. It's like any other ism, right? There's a lot to it. There's a lot that you can go into, but from how I've begun to understand it, It is an idea that there is value assigned to someone, and that value is based on maybe the perception of productivity, but also the perception of what their bodies can and can't do. And so it's the idea that there is a superiority to someone whose either mental or physical body can do something that we supposedly value more, and devaluing someone whose body or mind, as we perceive it, cannot. So it's having to do with how you almost like rank people, and this idea that, again, there is someone better than someone else, exclusively out of the idea of a disability, which of course it should not be. But as a society, unfortunately, we have a lot of that steeped in. So this is why we have some difficulty sometimes getting people to understand that accessibility is part of, say, usability. Accessibility is part of user experience. Accessibility is part of web development or software development. This idea of inclusive technology should be a baseline, but instead it's seen as a, we'll get to it if we can, because we don't value our peers who have disabilities.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we had a shift of framework or framing of how we see things, we would understand. I say we, like as a whole, like in the industry, we would understand that that it's just like a requirement, like that things are accessible. It's just a good design.
Exactly.
And so now you are working in your consulting and make accessibility work, which is like a great segue to talk a little bit about that. So you have experience working both for a company like for Pearson and other companies, and now owning your own business. Could you maybe share a little bit of some pros and cons of each?
Yeah, so I'm still pretty new with owning my own. I just started in January, pre-pandemic, so it's been interesting, but I'm still eating, so that's a good thing. So, okay, so what you get in any, you guys probably even see this in your labs or in any group, you're going to get some politics, you're going to get some personalities, you're going to get all that fun stuff. Now you can do more because you're a group, you can have a bigger impact because there's more people and resources, but that comes with more, facilitating how to get that done, right? So there's just balancing that with, for me, I wanted to just try my hand at being just a singular entity, and then contracting in and coming into a company or a group, providing them some sort of accessibility, again, consulting, whether it's training, whether it's providing them guidelines for how to do their work accessibly, whatever that may look like, maybe even strategies for building up accessibility in their organization, and then being able to come in and come out. So maybe I can alleviate some of the need to carry the burden of some of the more politics and things that come with working in a group, but still have an impact. And my other goal was to try and impact more companies by being flexible and rather than standing up in one company. So obviously pros and cons, stability, financial stability is important and it's a real thing. And so some people don't have the ability to live life not knowing if a paycheck is guaranteed, right? So that's reality. And even with corporations having lots of layoffs and economic instability and things like that, it's still much more stable to have a full-time job than to be on your own, particularly in the beginning, right? So that's one factor. And then some people don't necessarily want to be all and do all. So I am now marketing and sales and accounting and taxes and all these things, right? And some people don't want to wear all those hats. I don't mind, because again, it's just me and I'm curious about these things and I think I can handle it for now. We'll see if I get audited in a year. We'll see what happens. But I think I got it. I'm still learning the Twitter, but different things I'm willing to challenge myself and put myself out there and be a little foolish at times while I learn these things. But other people, again, want to just do their job and do the thing that they studied, and working at a company or in government or academia allows you to home in and do that a little bit more. So it's just a preference for lifestyle, and also what your lifestyle affords you the opportunity to be able to do. But I don't want to live with regrets. So, if there's something that I've planned out, mapped out, thought about for a long time, that thought won't go away, eventually I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And I'll do it as, carefully and thoughtfully as I can. But at the end of the day, this is just, it's a life I have to live, and why be so tentative with it if I have opportunity to be a little creative and have some freedoms. So.
I think that's wonderful because and I personally also believe like there's maybe unique paths, and like you have found that this is a path that makes sense right now, and so it's great that you're taking it on, and it's great for us that we are some researcher students, a mix of people here to hear from that other paths are possible, and if they align with that mission or goal that you have. So that's wonderful. And as you've transitioned in these different roles throughout academia, industry, and now your own business, I was wondering if there's any surprising experiences during these transitions that you encountered, and like how did you work through them? Or maybe if there were any challenges that are still present or were present during these transitions that you would like to share.
So I thought about this before. I don't know if there were too many challenges. Now, again, financially, that's a challenge. Like going from a full-time salary to a college salary, that can be different. But in terms of anything specific to those transitions, I don't think so. Only because I knew I was ready for that, whatever that next thing was. It was time to do that, right? Now, of course, I got laid off at Intel when time to get laid off at Intel. But otherwise, usually these things had a way of reaching a point of it's time to do that next thing. And I've been very grateful for that, where there's not been so much of an abruptness or a surprise to the transitions that I've had. They've just been part of the progression of how I've gone. One thing I'll say has been a little different, though, that I didn't think about, and it's such a weird little thing, but I'll say it anyway, is talks, like presentations. So in academia, particularly in the PhD, that's your bread and butter. You're always publishing, publish or perish, and you only give it once. You don't submit your paper to multiple locales. You don't give that talk more than once. And that's that world, and I was ingrained in that. But now that I'm particularly on my own, where I can decide where I want to give a presentation and on what topic, and it doesn't even have to be researched, I can just give an opinion. That world is so different. Like you're almost expected to give that talk over and over. Like it's almost irresponsible to give a talk just once, because what if you got feedback on how to make it better? Then, go do it again, make it better for the next audience, make that your brand. There are certain people whose talks or presentations have become their brand. And it's just so weird to me. I'm like, but that's illegal. What are you talking about? You submitted it again? What do you mean? So that has just been hilarious to me, to know that I had that in me and I didn't realize how much it was like a fear, like I can never give this presentation ever again, how dare I? So that's just been hilarious. And it's been freeing to know that I can draft a presentation at, like, say, a meetup or something, and then start to build it up into something that can become vetted and even better over time. And I think that's, now I'm kind of thinking, oh, that kind of stinks for academia, right? Like we could be doing this there, but that's just not how it works. So that's been one thing that's been just mind blowing to me. But otherwise, it is what it is. It's all life and it's all work. So nothing else really sticks out.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really interesting contrast. I had not thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
And also drawing from these experiences that you just shared, I wonder if you have any specific, maybe good advice for academic researchers or particularly students around maybe work practices, as you mentioned, like this is work, and work sometimes is like work. It has these certain qualities that stay the same, even if you're in industry, academia, or in your own. But I wonder if there's any advice you would like to share, maybe about work or work-life balance, well-being, or anything that you would like to add.
Yeah. The biggest thing, now that you asked that comes to mind, is procrastination will always be bad. That's like, the most eloquent, I have all these degrees and yet that is what I'm going to tell you. Um, yeah, and I know it's hard. I know take it from me. I've done years of procrastination and all the consequences that come with it, right? It is only until recently that I've stopped procrastinating because, how many times am I going to put myself in a bind before I realize, let me just stop doing this, right? So really and truly, that is one thing I really would reiterate is staying on top of your obligations will always work out better in the end. And I had some folks explain, that being organized allows you to deal with the chaos that inevitably is going to come. So being prepared for a presentation and then having them cut your time in half, you could go back to what you prepared and sift through that and make it, what it needs to be, versus if you were just going to wing it, now you're really in trouble. That same principle happens for everything. And no, you're not always going to feel like it, but find your tricks. Like for me, usually what I found is when I am procrastinating is because I'm looking at the problem too big and I need to break it down into smaller chunks. So that's one step I do. Sometimes it's literally just open the computer and type JFKLMN on a thing, get my fingers moving on the keyboard, and then my brain will go, well, we were thinking about, the other tips that you'll get, like get the things out of your head onto paper. So you've got these things in your mind. And while they're occupying space in your mind, nothing new can come in. So get that out of your mind so the new stuff can come in. All of these tips that you probably have heard or know and still don't do them because I'm telling you, it changes your life anywhere you end up. The other thing, though, it's not quite related to the question that you asked, but I think it's important for students to keep in mind now that I'm kind of on the other side. Like, for instance, when I read certain papers or I see just different projects come out. The other thing to keep in mind about industry is that the thing that you all see, like the product you all are using or the thing that has just been released and it's the newest, greatest thing, it's actually not new, it's old. Meaning there's a cycle to getting things in front of you, particularly technology or whatever it may be, whether that cycle is a year, a couple of years, whatever. So keep in mind that there's designers who probably don't even know the thing that they designed got released because they're already on to the next thing. So I find that sometimes that can frustrate people. Like when you're doing research on something, it feels like Google scooped me. That's because Google already knew that that was something on their backlog to do. They just needed to get something out the door. So they put that on, pause, put it out, and they were going to come back and add it or, whatever, insert any product, insert any feature. So just keep in mind that it's not that industry folks miss something when you guys are looking for things to study or objects to explore, things like that. It's just we haven't gotten to it yet because we got to have something to put out. If we try and make it perfect, it'll never come out. So there's iterations, and that's what's happening in the background and what you probably don't see and don't realize is happening. Particularly in the UX side, we're at the forefront of that, the researchers and designers. And there's some product people that are picking out what features we're going to work on. We're doing stuff, and then again, it could be a year, or if we're talking about hardware or cars or things going into space, then add, double, triple, quadruple those times. So I think that's just something that people in academia don't quite understand is happening. And I just like to explain that to folks in case it's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's good to know. Sometimes we might not perceive it, but there are different cycles happening. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into more specifically how accessibility is sometimes considered as a niche expertise. Like, oh, you're an accessibility expert, and while applying to new positions or interviewing for positions, how have you shown that your accessibility expertise is beneficial, even if all of your work is not explicitly accessibility related? Like maybe you're gonna work at some place that does be more open navigation for people, but your research was on navigation for sighted and not sighted users. So I was wondering, yeah, like how do you have shown that your accessibility expertise can apply to a position or that you're applying to?
Well, the good news is usually what happens is you have a baseline and accessibility. So it's hardly ever that your accessibility and therefore are not anything else, right? So usually what happens is I'm a web developer and I know accessibility, or for me, I say I'm equal parts a UX researcher and an accessibility specialist because I am. So it's usually going to be a benefit to be able to say, and I have an accessibility background, particularly if a company has had experience with needing accessibility people on the team, and you're coming in with that expertise versus they may have to build it up internally because people aren't coming in with that background. Also for me though, I just make it very clear that whatever job you're hiring me for, I don't strip accessibility away from it. So we're just very clear that like at Intel with the wearables, yes, I'm just a UX researcher. You guys make watches and all of that, and that's great. But I'm going to do an accessibility project too. And we have to be on the same page about that before we even go any further. So I just have that baked into me. And so there is no hiring me without getting accessibility as part of it. So that's just what it is.
Definitely. And I wonder if you have any advice for these research-oriented students who might be in their PhD program or in a master's program. Like, what could they do to prepare for a career in industry? Wonder if you have some
Internship.
advice. Internships?
And if I say it again, internships. So here's the problem. Industry has gotten to a point where they almost expect you to have experience even at an entry-level job, or they don't have as many entry-level jobs because they don't want to have to pay to bring someone up. They want to hire someone who's already been brought up into whatever role they're hiring for, which is not good. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. But unfortunately, it's the way things kind of are right now, particularly in fields that are somewhat saturated, like UX and development, where different boot camps and other opportunities have arisen to allow education in those areas. And so there are a lot of candidates to weed through. And so again, they're kind of, saying that experience is one of the ways that they're going to sift through that. But also internships give you the opportunity to decide if this is what you want to do. So even if it's not necessarily the company, you can still, again, like I said, looking at your professors, you should be looking at the people at the company you're with. Is that the lifestyle you want? How did they get there? What is their day like? What do they do? What are their aspirations? How often have they moved around within the company, through other companies? It's a lifestyle that you can explore without the obligation of being full-time. So now internships are not easy to find. They're not easy to get. This is where networking comes in. So that's the other thing that you always hear, but it's absolutely true. You have to build up your network. So that is how you get almost all of your opportunities are going to some kind of way come from, even if it's not someone getting you a job, someone telling you about a job, someone telling you about a program. All of those things come from casting a wide net in terms of people that you're connected with. So those are, the two big things you always hear, but they're absolutely true. Let's see. Also, be clear about what your skills are and try to be mindful of how those skills apply. And here's why I say that. So for instance, my first job was a GUI designer, but my first week or so, they asked me to do something with a spreadsheet that had like 10,000 records. And they kept asking me like, Perl, right? The programming language Perl. I was like, yeah, I know Perl. I knew Perl from like years before. I hadn't used it in a while, but yeah, I know Perl. I did not, I don't know why, and y'all are going to talk about me later, and that's fine, but I did not associate this task they gave me to do with writing a Perl script. I was doing it by hand, and they kept asking me, I'm like, why do they keep asking me if I know Perl? Yes, I know Perl. What they got to do with, honey, they wanted you to write a Perl script to go through the thing. That's why they gave you the task. Because in school, you say, they give you an assignment, use Perl to write this thing. use JavaScript to do this thing. And sometimes, particularly when it's all thrown at you over the years and down and down and down, and all you're trying to do is finish your finals and get out and get done, you forget what you have in your toolbox and how it might apply to the things that you're being asked to do in industry where it's fuzzier, where you're just sort of given a task and you've got to sift through what are the actual requirements and what is the output. So just being mindful every now and again to look back and review your own resume, review your own transcripts and what you've been doing, and remember what skills you have so you can be the one to tell someone, oh, I have those skills to do X, Y, and Z, and market yourself and know what you're bringing to the company as well. Last thing, be able to explain what you do and why it's important to people who are not in your field and may not actually care. That's a big one, huge one. Because in companies and in anything outside of these kind of groups that you're in, you're going to be working with people who are not in your field and possibly don't want to hear anything except what's the end result and what does it have to do with me and what we're trying to do. So be able to do that. Find some people in your circle. For me, it's my mom. I explained, I practice talks with her. She's my guinea pig. Or some other people like that in my life that are not in any way in my field. Sometimes I run things by them to make sure that they understand it, and therefore the next person is going to understand it. Because you have to be able to communicate and work with people outside of your niche, almost any venue that you're going to be in. So practice doing that along the way as well. Okay, that was a lot, sorry.
No, thank you so much. That was great. Because I think in academia, we get comfortable with the idea that everybody knows what this jargon term means. Everybody knows this related work. So I'm just gonna address it by the last name of this researcher instead of like really explaining where we're coming from. And so I just have one last question before we go to the questions and answers section that I see some questions in the chat already. Do you keep in touch at all if you're interested with what's going on in academic research? And if so, like, how do you justify like maybe academic conference attending? Although I guess now you are an independent consultant and you have your own business, so it might be better, but how do you justify maybe on your time for yourself, maybe doing academic service, if any, like reviewing papers or other responsibilities? How do you, negotiate that?
Excellent question. Okay, so the reality is this: if you want to, which generally is good to do if you can. It all depends on how the economy and how the company is doing. When the economy and company is doing well, you usually can get approved to do a lot of fun stuff, like go to conferences, right? Economy and company is not doing well, you're not going anywhere. So that's really the long and short of a lot of it. And it does help if you have a presentation that you're going to be doing at that conference to motivate that as well. But that's generally how that goes. I don't often keep so much in touch with the academic research, only because I don't have time sometimes. And also because, like we talked about before, sometimes what's happening in academic research is not quite ready for prime time. And so whereas I'm working on something that needs to go out like tomorrow, academic research is more thinking about kind of future studies. And so sometimes that just doesn't have as much applicability, or it's not proven out enough quite for me to be able to grab onto it and apply it. But it's still good to, go to the conferences, network, see again, sometimes every now and again, stick your head out of what's current and see what's coming down the pike and all of that too. And I do, I have a paper I'm reviewing right now because it was a field related to what I did in my PhD. So when I feel comfortable, I do still sometimes just do that on my own time. But sometimes I do feel like, okay, I'm a little too disconnected from the current research to be able to really evaluate like their related work and if they've really got all the right information. So I just sort of make that decision on my own. So far that's kind of been my strategy, whether or not I pursue going to an academic conference. But it depends on your company, it depends on what they value, and it depends on, why you want to stay connected. Is it just out of curiosity, or are you trying to make connections to bring, university and industry together? There could be a lot of reasons to do it, and it is possible.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to ask that people who have written questions in the chat, if maybe they want to raise their hand and ask their questions out loud, or if I should read them for them. If you want me to read your question for you, maybe you can put a yes check on the chat. I'm happy to do that. Or if you want to go ahead, I see. Okay, Anne, would you like to go ahead? See, your hand is raised up.
Well, Michele, thank you so much for sharing all of this great information. I'm on the job market this year and looking at all sorts of positions, so very, very relevant. I wanted to ask about your experience. It sounds like, some of the companies you went to, and I imagine in consulting, going into places that don't really have a culture or support of even thinking about accessibility, and what approaches you've taken or your experience with that, since from what I've seen, that can be a very uphill battle.
It is uphill. It is draining. My experience is just do it as long as I can until maybe, and see what happens. Okay, so here's the deal with why accessibility is uphill though. Some of it is discrimination. Again, some of it is the ableism like we talked about. But some of it I'm starting to understand is just how business is set up to operate, particularly in a capitalist society. Businesses are meant to produce new stuff and grow. So when people come in, they're expecting those people to do that job. So when they find out that the people they hired don't have this skill called accessibility, and yet they could get in trouble for it, and so they've got to do it, you've got to stop them and train them. Then you've got to start making decisions like, do we go back and fix what we didn't do accessibly before? Do we just do it going forward? How does that work with what, is an issue with our customer? There's a lot happening with that discussion. And so it can get complex, and then you get different people with different points of view coming to the table. Again, some people don't want to spend their budget training employees on accessibility, particularly if those employees may not hang around and use accessibility at that company. Or, there's certain timelines that have already been set up and they don't have time to stop and go back or stop and train and test and things like that. So there's a lot of issues that, again, I think if nothing else, I think it helps to understand people's point of view so that you can address it that way, right? So you're not just coming in like, we got to do accessibility and do it now and do it like this. Because if some companies make the wrong decision about how they go about it, they might go out of business. Then they're not helping anybody, right? So I think understanding those nuances and being more mindful of that, and you catch more flies with honey, all of that kind of stuff, while still being firm in your stance that ultimately this needs to happen, guys. We can have a plan, but it needs to happen. That might help. But if they don't already have a culture, you will have to make some decisions. Are they going to have a culture at some point? Are you only going to be the person? Do you think you have some allies? Are you going to be comfortable being the only champion until you build up allies? There's just, a lot of soul searching you're going to have to do to see if you are ready to dive into that alone. Yeah.
I had a question kind of related to that, but thinking about like the startups or the companies or the consultancies who are really just doing accessibility products or accessibility services. Sometimes it can be really hard for them when maybe there isn't a huge market share. So the only way to get their product out there is to make it really expensive or stuff like that. Do you have thoughts on like maybe futures of how small consultancies or startups around accessibility might look or might kind of position themselves to, still break into those markets or still provide whatever service they want without, kind of suffering at the whims of just, business at that kind of scale?
I'm not a business major, so no, but I will say I see a little bit of a tide shift in that more and more companies are at least saying the word accessibility. So there might at some point be opportunity to, do more of the collaborate, it'll be more places for you to do your work, right? More companies will want to hire more of the smaller firms to help them supplement their accessibility programs, or they'll buy them out, or they'll take something on that in terms of the manufacturing that will decrease the cost of some of these specialized assistive technologies. And we're seeing some of that with the Braille displays that are coming out. So I think there's opportunity for integration if we can get the message out that accessibility, again, is not supposed to be this niche thing. It's actually supposed to be the thing you do, right? So fingers crossed, we're getting there. But it is right now just supply and demand, right? So right now, if it's perceived as a small demand, then you're going to have those outcomes.
I see Molly. Molly?
Thanks. Hi, Michelle. Absolutely loved the talk. Very inspiring and very interesting. Especially the bit that you said about thinking and observing the people around you, and sort of that can help decide whether you want to go in the industry or stay in the academia. And that's kind of important to me right now. I'm in my 3rd year of Ph.D. at the University of Michigan. And really trying to figure out where I want to be 2-3 years from now. So a question that I wanted to ask, and this may seem like a follow-up to Anne and Cole's question, was if you could talk a bit about the kind of projects and clients that you have worked with as an independent consultant, and how that experience has been different from when you were embedded full-time within a company.
Wonderful. Okay, so within that, I'll actually explain that I'm kind of exploring 2 different ways of being independent. So one is completely independent. I work one-on-one with that company, and some of what that's looked like is Webflow. It's a company similar to WordPress. They are starting up some big accessibility initiatives. I have a former colleague who works there who got me connected and started off slow with an article to help their customers build more accessible websites. So make sure you put your headings and yada yada. And that will hopefully over time become more helping them with their courses, and then eventually hopefully helping with some of helping the UI of the designer itself become more accessible, and some of their products internally become more accessible, whether it's through research or just general advisement, since they don't have accessibility specialists necessarily in their UX design teams. Similarly for ACM, I'm working on a guide for accessible virtual conferences. That's a big thing right now. And I just recently got another contract to do something very similar for another organization. So some of it has been on the education side, guidance, how-tos, and then that's also an inroads to maybe more webinars, teaching, explaining, evangelizing, and advising if there's some sort of UI. The other route is to become a contractor at a company. So that's what I'm also doing. So right now I'm with US Bank, and there is a team of accessibility consultants who partner with the UX, particularly the designers, evaluating their wireframes and giving them advice on how to design accessibly and annotate it before you hand it to the developer, so that hopefully we build an accessible thing from start to finish. So those are kind of 2 ways to do it. And I've kind of stayed in my lane of either UX work or training or advising, some kind of way like that. And I can also kind of give some advice on strategy and how you build up an accessibility team. That changes from working in industry where I was primarily a UX researcher. It still actually had some tie-in to what I do right now as an accessibility consultant with the bank, because in order to do research, I have to have something to do research with. So that means you have to build me up an accessible prototype at some point so that I can get in front of people just like I would do any other prototype if I'm, say, doing usability testing or something like that. So I still did a lot of evangelizing training and design reviews, but there was still the component of the research that maybe I don't necessarily do as an independent consultant, but I definitely have the responsibility to do internally. So some differences, it depends on, I guess I have more freedoms, but I had a lot of freedoms internally too, because I was so autonomous with my job that I could kind of say, hey, I'm working over here with these people. They need help over here and nobody else is going to help them. So I just kind of had that way about me too, that I worked with VPs and managers and others cross teams, and you find that the UX people and the accessibility people do that a lot because we see the bigger picture. Everyone else is kind of in a silo, QE, dev, project. I don't know, people kind of tend to work in their silos, but when you're UX, you tend to be the one that brings everyone together and you see everything. And because you see everything, then you start to want to fix stuff. So that usually ended up happening too.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Well, we're almost at 3 p.m. and I just wanted to thank Michele again so much for joining us today. I think this has been super informative and great to hear. I also wonder if anybody has some last thoughts to share or if you have something.
I think we're at time, but this is Cynthia. Thank you so much. This was fantastic, and we'll post the recording on YouTube, so we'll get that out in a few days. So,
well,
thanks everybody.
For
Bye.
Have a great one. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.